So what is baking? Baking is a process by which we take a videotape, oftentimes a tape that has something called sticky shed syndrome, or that might have mold, and we literally put it in a scientific baker and bake it from anywhere from 125 degrees to up to 160 degrees in severe cases. The tape baking process allows us to essentially get a clean transfer. When we get videotapes into the lab, sometimes they have noticeable mold, as you can see here, or they might just be older broadcast formats like this U-matic format here. Especially being in the South, a lot of our tapes tend to suffer from environmental exposure like humidity and heat, and what that can do is create sticky shed syndrome, which is where humidity actually enters the physical videotape itself. So think of that black tape that you see when you're fast forwarding and rewinding, and that can actually start to stick inside of the machine and fall apart. So then you don't actually have a playable tape, and as a matter of fact, you might actually damage the tape and render it permanently unplayable and also break your machine in the process. So here at Texas Archive, we do all of our preservation and remediation and restoration in-house. So we are trained essentially in tape cleaning, tape baking, and how to do tape assessments. So once we've done a physical assessment of the videotape, we'll determine if we actually need to test the tape. So in the case of U-matic tapes, we'll throw it in the machine and we'll see if it plays back and what the quality of playback is. About 8 times out of 10, the playback is not great. We start to see little white flecks like snow on the video screen appear. We might also just hear a squealing noise that's really foul, and that tells us the reels are tight and can't move because they're stuck together from that sticky shed. It literally makes them stick. Or we might get error codes on our machine. The error codes on the machine are usually connected to some sort of tension issues indicating that the reels will not move, again because of that sticky shed. If we have a tape that has noticeable mold, so for example this happens a lot with the VHS tapes that we get from South Texas, think Houston or the Rio Grande Valley, we have to do is actually just immediately put those to bake at 140 degrees minimum. Scientifically speaking, 140 degrees at a minimum of 3 hours actually deactivates and kills the mold spores and particles, and then after we bake we can clean that tape and get a clean transfer. Now for our U-matic tapes and our VHS tapes, the process is the same. Post baking we'll have to reassemble the tape. So before we throw it in the baker, we have to physically deassemble it and take out the raw reels like this so that proper air circulation can penetrate the entire black tape. And then we put it back in its original cartridge. You can see that there are screws here, and we literally rebuild the tape, put it in the machine, and then transfer it. Now, if the tape still has playback issues, we'll maybe give it 1 or 2 baking attempts, but it is very labor intensive. It can sometimes take up to a week to do a cycle of baking. And again, that's mostly unique to us in the South because there is such a high level of humidity here that our tapes take way more time to bake than say tapes where there's drier climates like on the West or East Coast. Okay, so what is a baker? A baker is actually a scientific grade laboratory oven that can get up to 500 degrees, and it actually just circulates air, and that warm air essentially dehumidifies the tape. So there's 2 holes at the top where heat and humidity can evaporate from. And there's actually a thermometer at the top that will tell us the temperature of the baker. It also has an auto safety fail switch, so if the baker overheats, in theory, it'll just shut off. And we also have, for extra safety, a fire alarm connected to my phone that tells us if there's ever a fire. So what we do is we adjust the temperature here on this oven, we turn it on here, and then the red light goes on and tells us that there's a heat cycle. After about a week, that's when we reassemble the tapes, test them, and see if we need to do an additional cycle or 2. Unfortunately, it's estimated that only about 70% of baked tapes are recoverable. So that's to say that after about 2 or 3 cycles, if we're still not able to get a clean transfer, that tape probably falls into the 30% of tapes that are not recoverable. So because of how labor intensive this process is, we do everything in-house so that we can supervise it and we can keep notes in our system and database about how many times we bake, what the progress and status is, and all that to say say. We can only do 9 tapes at a time. So that's another thing that adds to how labor intensive this is every tape receives a level of attention, and it can take up to a full day to transfer or test all 9 tapes. So what are some of the things to look out for to know that your tapes need baking? One of the most common things is visible mold. So the way that you can identify that is it'll look like white patches on your VHS tape. They'll be very apparent, and so if you find that, that is definitely a candidate for baking, because that is not safe to put in a machine because mold spores can spread if they're active. The other thing to look out for is what we will just generally call snow. So if you have ever played a tape and you see a bunch of snow across your screen, or just like white everywhere, that's how you know that a tape is also a candidate for baking. Now the other one, which probably you won't encounter, but if you find any really old format of videotapes, like say a U-matic tape or a 1-inch open reel tape, those 9 times out of 10 need to be baked. If you want some DIY solutions on how to bake at home, you can find some YouTube tutorials that kind of walk through how to safely do it, even in your home oven or in a food dehydrator. I always recommend doing it professionally if possible, just because there is a lot of troubleshooting that happens in the remediation process, and it can sometimes be unsafe to do yourself because it can be a fire hazard, because you do need to supervise your oven at all times while it's running, or food dehydrator. But if you are trying to do this DIY, there's plenty of resources online on YouTube that'll kind of guide you through the process of how to attempt this at home. If you have any more questions about DIY fixes or repairs to videotapes, let us know in the comments.